Very good. So welcome Moshe and wife Jeanette. So good to have you guys with us. And the Jesus Trek just looks inspiring, does it? Just before I, stop talking and let our guest speakers speak, I just thought it'd be good for those of you who are part of our church just to understand how this connection came about. For those of you who've been part of our church, I took my first ever trip to Israel in May, and it was a life-changing trip for me. God really did something in my life when I was in that Holy Land. But I went with somebody from LA who's an actor, and because of his profile, while he was there were opportunities to connect with people in Israel. And I'd heard about the Jesus Trek, and I'd heard about what Moshe had done with Hillsong. And while I was in Israel, I kept saying to my friend Nathaniel, you need to reach out to these guys. And unbeknownst to me, you were thinking the same thing. And so through a divinely orchestrated meeting, we ended up having lunch together in Jerusalem one day, and we just connected, and there was just a relationship that developed. So just thought I'd let you know that God was in that, his hand was on that, and here he is today talking to you fine people. So let's just give God a praise for how he's brought that together. Wonderful. All right, let's get into our interview, Moshe. I promise there'll be nothing too heavy theologically.
No, we like the heavy.
So just tell us about yourself, your family, and what you do for a living.
Shalom. Glad to be here. And yes, I'm Moshe. Moshe is Moses in Hebrew. And what do I do for a living? That's a good question. I heard quite some Dutch here, right? Is that right? So what do I do for a living? I say I have a Dutch wife, and she saves me more money than I earn, so that's what I do for a living. No, what I really do for a living, where is she? There at the back, okay. We bring people from all over the world to Israel, to the Holy Land, and it's really our mission to connect people to Jesus in the land, and I think the land is the best tool for that. And I've done this now for over 12 years, and it's really that we see many people coming to the land, and their lives have been changed. Really understanding more about Jesus, understanding more about the Bible, and everything becomes three-dimensional when you're traveling the land.
It's very good. Very good. So Moshe, you obviously love Jesus. That became clear in my first meeting with you, and you have a relationship with him. Can you just tell us how you personally came to know Christ?
I grew up with believing in Jesus. My mom, where is she? Mama, here. Yeah, there in the back. So my mom, she's Swiss, and she's Christian. So my father is Israeli Jewish, so that's happened. I think, as far as I heard, what happened is my mom became a believer and wanted to go to the Holy Land. She came and visited the Holy Land, and my grandmother, my father's mom, happened to be the maid in the hotel, and she invited my mom for Shabbat dinner, that is Friday night dinner before the day of rest. And she invited her, and when washing the dishes, she asked my mom, which one of my sons do you want? And that's how it happened. And so my father is Israeli Jewish, my mom Swiss Christian, and I was born then in Switzerland. So I grew up going to church in Switzerland, but I got a Jewish identity through my father. So when I leave the first part, that's not so now to mention, but the second part, when I was 13, they took me to Israel, to the Western Wall, and then you had your, how do you call this, when you're like 13? Yep, it's but you know what's bar mitzvah? Okay, good. So I had bar mitzvah at the Western Wall, and then we celebrated the feast, and every Friday evening for Shabbat dinner we've been at home and as a family together. So I grew up believing in Jesus, but had a Jewish identity. I didn't know how, strong this is connected to each other as well, until I really moved to Israel, and that I did when I was 19.
Wow. If you've never experienced an Israeli feast, you are missing out. Just for 30 seconds, Moshe, preach the gospel of Israeli food.
Hummus. No, the Israeli feasts, we say, you can summarize all the feasts in Israel. It's they wanted to kill us, we've survived, and now we eat. That's
It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
I think you kind of answered this question, but I'd love to just hear a bit more on when being Jewish first really held significant meaning for you, like your identity as a Jewish person.
Wow. I mean, my life is complicated. I think everyone's life in Israel, especially in Israel, is complicated. It's a country of immigration. So I at the age of 19, I wanted to move to Israel. There was 2001. There was a terror attack in Tel Aviv, where a Palestinian suicide bomber came into a club in Tel Aviv, and over 20 young people died. And I just came back that night from going out with friends. And at that night, I decided to go to Israel. So to serve in the army. And I went to my father. I called my father and said, I go to Israel. My father said, okay, it's good. It's really good for you. Does you well going there in the army. And my mom just said, if you think that is what God wants you to do, then we should go. And I went to Israel. I thought now the hero from Switzerland comes and rescues Israel for all its enemies. And you know, just the first day in the army, I would have loved to go back to my mom. And I remember the second day in the army, it was raining and cold, and our whole tent was flooded with water, and I had to sleep with my big backpack on the bed. And I had fever, I was sick, and I called my mom, and I regretted what I decided to do. And I remember my mom, you know, mom in Switzerland, the son goes to the army, it's Intifada, it's the worst years we had during the last, since the Yom Kippur War. And it wasn't easy for my mom to have her son going to kind of in a war zone. And she was always reading Bible verses to me. Never said, yeah, it's your decision, you decided to do this. And I would have probably gone back if she would said that. So she was reading Bible verses to me. So, and at the beginning I didn't really understand, but later on I really understood what it means. And kind of in Switzerland I grew up very spoiled. Switzerland is a very easy country. Everything is on a very high level. And then going to a moment where you don't know if you survive the next day, and you don't have any financial security, no physical security, it's the easiest way to learn to trust God. And that's what happened to me in the army. So the army really needed to be for me. So I probably didn't really give much to my country by myself, but it helped me more really finding my way and strengthen my faith. But what was the question?
You answered.
Yeah, I answered? Okay.
I'd like to ask you, Moshe, has your understanding of what it means to be Jewish,
Yeah, exactly.
changed at all since you've become
That's
a
why
believer?
I just wanted to explain the background, because now I come to Israel, and in Israel, Judaism today, it's not biblically, it changed later, but Judaism is seen as whoever has a Jewish mom is Jewish. And it goes over the mom. In biblical time, it was made through the father, and your tribe came through the father. So the rabbis changed it at one point because they said we better know who's the mom, and we don't always know who's the father. And that's why Judaism changed it to the mother's line. And then I come to Israel, and I serve in the army. You kind of almost sacrifice your life for the country. And then they tell you you're not really Jewish. Yeah. So, but then, you know, you kind of a little bit don't feel 100% part of the society. But I really didn't much care. But learning more about Judaism, about the Jewish thinking of the Bible, gave me to understand Jesus better. I grew up in a Swiss church that had no connection to Israel. It took me 8 years of organizing tours to Israel to finally bring my own congregation. I sent the pastor 3 times for free to Israel, and it didn't help. And after 8 years, finally I got my own congregation to Israel. I really understood that you cannot be a prophet in your own city. But I grew up in this church, never really realizing that there is a much deeper understanding of Jesus when you are in Israel and when you as well know the Jewish thinking. And the Jewish understanding of the Bible, it just makes much more sense. And living in Israel, I can say the same problems of 2,000 years ago, the same struggles, the same theological questions that have been there 2,000 years ago are existing today exactly the same. And living in Israel, it makes it just more, you read the Bible, you read Jesus having a discussion with the Pharisees, you just understand that it like history repeats itself. It's the same struggle of how do we understand the Bible, between law, between brotherly love, between grace, and it's something that is just daily life. It's every day you're confronted with these questions, and finding my Hebraic roots have given me a much deeper understanding of Jesus.
Wow. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more. I know we had a really interesting discussion in Jerusalem on what it is to be Jewish and to be a Christian, and we discussed the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Paul's writings on the gospel of grace. And Paul seems to strongly say that no one can be justified by the law before God. But then in Romans 11, he says, all Israel shall be saved. So I would love you to address that theological conundrum.
I'm a tour guide, I'm not a pastor. Mom, can you come help? No, oh wow, okay, so how should I explain this? Probably most complex issue about that aspect, and we see as well that was the struggle of Paul. And it's the same exactly, especially when you live in Israel, you feel it's the same question. In the Messianic communities in Israel, it's the same issue. Are we under the law or not under the law? And you have Messianic congregation that are like Orthodox Jews. On the other hand, they're not different than an American church. So it's a big question. For me, I cannot say I have an answer. I don't want to say like I have here the truth. No, it's for me a searching, especially living in Israel, is a searching. And I maybe explain it on one story that gives me a little bit an understanding of how to combine this and how to understand this. When we have the story in the Bible where Jesus is asked by the Pharisees, what should we do with it's not a prostitute, it's a woman that commits adultery. And they ask her, what should we do with her? We should stone her according to the law. And Jesus says, whoever is free of the sin can throw the first stone. So now how do we understand this story? We can understand it. There is the Old Testament, the law that is stoning, it's hard, it's like, and then we have Jesus giving grace, or showing grace. So are we having two different gods? How do we have an angry God that stones, and do we have a God that is showing mercy? Did God change his mind over time? And that is, and then I asked a rabbi about stoning, and he gave an interesting aspect. So I hope I I don't get into now too long story, but what says the law about stoning? So the law says about stoning, you should stone somebody who commits adultery, not just a woman, as well a man. And there are several criteria that need to be in order to stone according to the law in the Bible. You need to have the Sanhedrin active. So that means after destruction of the temple in the year 70, you don't have a Sanhedrin anymore. Then you need to have at least 2 witnesses that have seen the act of committing adultery, that have warned the person doing it beforehand that they will be stoned, that they by themselves are not random sinners in their community, like seen as bad people and sinners, and that they have never done the same by themselves. So we have criteria, and then even if all these criteria apply, they need to be the first one to throw the stones, that if, in case they lied, that they would not throw the stone out of compassion. So Jesus then, before he answers, what does he do? He writes in the sand. And it's the only time he writes. So we don't know what he writes. It's not written what he writes. But if you go into Jewish law or biblical law, somebody who wants to defend needs to say where this is written. Yeah, it's like a lawyer. So according to historical legal Jewish understanding, Jesus probably wrote there where it's written what it needs to be in order to stone this woman. And then he says, whoever is free of the sin and probably, has all these criteria, can throw the first stone, and then everybody walks away. So what is my understanding of this is that grace is incorporated in the law. Yeah, Jesus is just the one who filters it out, because God has said committing adultery is not allowed, and has given even a punishment. But this punishment is impossible really to apply. And in Jewish history, if you go in all the Jewish historical books, not just the Bible, as well outside, that explain what happened in court cases, there has never been an official Sanhedrin court case on stoning. There's never been somebody sentenced to stone according to the legal aspect ever in Jewish history. So because it's not possible. So God gave us a punishment, but we are not able to apply the punishment really, because who can find 2 witnesses that have all these criteria? So, but what would be a world that doesn't tell us committing adultery is a sin? So, so what I want to say with that is that Jesus is the one that gives us the right understanding of the Bible and the right understanding of the law. It's not that we need to keep things, and it's not that keeping things brings us to salvation, but the law is as well a wall. Yeah, and walls can limit us, but it can as well protect us. And this is the challenge in my life, to really understand what God wants me to kind of do. But if we listen to Jesus, it's very easy. We might keep our Sunday free of work. We might keep our Shabbat free of work. And it's healthy for the family. There's nothing against that. It's really being and forcing us to be with our families, to spend a day a week, to spend a day with God. And there's nothing wrong about this, but it's not gonna be that brings us salvation. On the other hand, what does Jesus say? If your brother wants to bring an offer to the altar and has when you want to bring an offer to the altar and your brother has something against you, then first reconcile you with your brother and then bring the offering. So what is offering? Offering is law and brotherly love. So how can we, if we keep everything, if we do, even communion is some kind of law, because Jesus asked us to do it. So can we do communion if we just had a fight with our wife? It's if we listen to Jesus, that's the we are kind of playing with God, and these questions are even so much more complicated from a Jewish perspective, because can you do all of these things that you should do if you really are a bad person and you're not really in peace or with your neighbors? So it's a struggle, it's a searching, and Paul was speaking to people that were pagans. They believed in all kind of gods. And Paul said God doesn't have a plan for you to circumcise, to become Jewish. That's not the plan. He wants to bring salvation to you, but you don't need to become Jewish for that. So I hope as a tour guide, and
I think we should applaud that answer. That's phenomenal, Moshe, and I appreciate your honesty. And our lunch meeting that was supposed to be half an hour turned into 2.5 hours because of these conversations. And I love the humility to not say that I have all the answers, but to just be honest and real and be on the journey. That's great. I won't go deeper into theology, Moshe, because you're a tour guide. So I want you to just, if you can, explain Zionism. Because around the world today, particularly in the West, and I would say primarily in the United States, there is almost a blind support and admonition of the state of Israel, the movement of Zionism. Could you help us understand, as a Christian perspective, what Zionism means and potentially what our attitude towards Zionism should be?
Good. Zionism comes from Zion. Zion is Jerusalem, or another word for Jerusalem. Zionism really started, modern Zionism started with Theodor Herzl, the Austro-Hungarian journalist that saw that there's anti-Semitism coming up in Europe, and then he writes a book, Old New Land, and he says, that's my idea, and we Jews should go back to our homeland. Now Herzl was a secular Jew. He was a modern secular Jew. And then he comes with this book and tells the Jewish communities in the world, hey, listen, we should go back to our homeland. That's what God promised us in hundreds of prophecies. And imagine now a secular Jew stands up and says, we need to fulfill the prophecies in the Bible. You know who were the ones who didn't agree with Herzl? The religious ones. Because they say, who are you as a secular Jew to fulfill, you're kind of doing self-fulfilling prophecy. You take the prophecies in your own hands and you want to fulfill them. Who gave you the right to do that? And that's a question. If God promised us it, the Zionism is a fundamental question. If God promises us something, do we need to take it in our hands or sit in our chairs until he brings us there? There's no answer or no straight answer for this. It's just a question because, can we say, hey, God promised me that, so I'm going to fight for it as long as I get it? And then the question, if God promises something and you take it in your own hands, will it be smooth? And will it be without struggles? Will it be easy? And that's Zionism, where the Jews decided to come buy land, settle in Palestine before the First World War, and then the British took over, and then thanks a lot to the Australians, the light horse, the Jewish people at all can live back in their homeland. Yeah, it's a big thanks to the Australians. And we've seen that last year we had 300 Australians coming for the 100 years. Yeah, October 2017 was the 100 years light horse, the conqueror of Beersheba in the south. And they reenacted it, and your prime minister came together with Netanyahu, and it was a big celebration. Many Australians came over to see this. And yes, it's at the First World War, the land was taken over from Muslims, and the first time the land is in the hands of Christians. Yeah, the British, and many who, at that time understood what it means to control this land. And that's the reason why at the end the Jewish people were able to establish the state. So now, it didn't go smooth. It didn't go easy. It didn't go that everybody was saying yes and amen to such a change in the world, and after the Holocaust in Europe, and the Jews who had to leave the Arab countries. So it's not a smooth story. It's not a black and white story. Yeah, it's not that everything is holy. Yeah, it's man-made decision in a process that, in my perspective, yes, God wants. And we see that today, that I'm able to live in a country that is safe, that has its own army, and we are not in any other power's hands anymore. So we can decide on our security, we can take care of ourselves, and I believe that Israel is at the stage that it can support the whole world in technology, in help, in humanitarian help, and we are at this point where we don't need to think about ourselves anymore, so we really can think, how can we bring something to this world, and think about what is really the peace that God wants that we have with our neighbors.
Yeah. I'll just ask you one more question around that, Moshe. As someone who's been a student of history, particularly of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I thought I had an understanding of it until I went to that land and realized I have no understanding. It's incredibly complex considering there are Christian Arabs in the land. Could you just quickly, just not necessarily even bring a position, but just quickly explain how complex the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is on the ground there, and why the world is so interested in that particular dispute?
Has somebody planned lunch for today, or?
That's it.
Okay, well. Okay, okay. How should I do that short? I'll make that modern and biblical. I'll try to make it short. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have two people with two different faiths, two different religions. Now the West looks at it as a territorial conflict, that there is a way of doing a line in the middle, and then all the parties will be happy and live in peace with each other. That is for myself questionable, because the Israelis want security and the Palestinians want, if I look at it from a total modern Western perspective, the Israelis want security, that if they give away land and the West Bank that should become a Palestinian state, they have a country of 17 kilometers wide. Yeah, we're including the West Bank, including the Palestinian area, we are a third of Tasmania. Yeah. Less the West Bank, we are 17 kilometers wide. That's how your beach probably is wide. Yeah. The beautiful. But, and in these 17 kilometers live about 5 million people. And then there's mountains where the Palestinians are. On the mountains of Israel today are the Palestinians, and this is not the land that Israel wants to give away. So if they give away the mountains, they will have probably rockets going down on Tel Aviv. And the Palestinians want freedom of movement. And when they would give away this land and give them a freedom of movement, then the border to Jordan would be open. because it needs to be open. They need to have their own trade, their own control their own borders. But now Israel controls the border from Jordan to the West Bank. So if they give totally free borders, that means all the rockets gonna come in and all the extremists will bring in their weapons without Israel controlling it, and then they have an enemy on the mountains. So it's freedom of movement, of self-determination against the security of Israel. So it's very hard to find a way where both can, the Palestinians have the total freedom, on the other hand Israel has their full security and can still defend itself with a country of 17 kilometers. So that's the modern perspective, or in my perspective, it's impossible. And that's just the topography. There's then Jerusalem, there's settlements, there's refugees, there's another 10 different topics that we could speak about and say what are the problems, and then everybody can make its decision if there is a solution. But I would like to shortly into one thing that I've realized over the years living there. You know the story of Sarah and Hagar. When Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael out to the desert, an angel appears to them. And you know what, you probably never made attention to where this exactly happened. And this place that it happened, where the angel appeared to them, is Beer Lahai Roi. That's a place. We don't know where it is. There's no archaeological evidence of this place. It's somewhere in the land, in that area. And there the angel appears to them. So Abraham threw them out to the desert, but God still has a plan with them. Then Sarah dies. So Abraham has, Sarah dies, and later Abraham dies. And you know, it's interesting that when Abraham dies, Isaac and Ishmael go united and bury their father. We don't know where this reconciliation happened, but they go together and they leave one place and from there they go to Hebron and bury their father. You know what's the name of this place that they leave together from? Beer Lahai Roi. It's twice mentioned in the Bible. So somehow the place where the angel appeared to Hagar and Ishmael is the same place where later somehow Isaac and Ishmael lived together in unity. Wow. And went to bury their father. And Ishmael buried the father that has rejected him. You know, bury your father, it really means that you give him the last honor. Yeah. And the question, why? We don't know why. So now I do something that might be weird for you. It was a beginning as well weird, but it's exactly what Jesus does over all his teachings. He has parables. And the parables that Jesus tells us, we don't know if they're true. Even Jesus doesn't say that the Good Samaritan doesn't need to be true. It's more a story to explain the message. Yeah. So the Jews always had parables. And they have a whole book of parables that explain us the Bible. They don't need to be true, but they're made-up stories, probably made-up stories, to explain us why things that are not explained to us in the Bible. So there is a parable written about in the year 400, 200 years before Islam came up. And the parable, a Jewish parable, says, how did Abraham and Ishmael reconcile? And later as well Isaac. How did it happen? So this story says to us that Abraham, after Sarah died, has said, oh, Sarah died, now I can reconcile with Ishmael. I can do whatever I want to do. Now Sarah died. So after she dies, Abraham goes to the tent of Ishmael and asks for Ishmael. But his wife is there and says, you're not welcome. So Abraham goes and says to his wife, when Ishmael comes back, say to him that the spirit of your tent is not good. So Ishmael comes back, and that the old man of Canaan came and said, your spirit of your tent is not good. So the wife told him that. So he realized his father came to reconcile. So he divorced his first wife. The second wife then was better and welcomed Abraham at the second visit. And that's how they reconciled. And you know how in the Jewish parable, written 200 years before Islam came up, you know how these two wives of Ishmael were called? Fatma and Aisha. And what I want to say with this, that the Muslims, Muhammad, his closest family, his wife and daughter, I think, his closest family were called after the two made-up names of the Jews of Ishmael. And what I want to say that dealing as well and working with Muslims in the land, and as well with a lot of Palestinians who have good relationships, especially in tourism, you see the spirit of Ishmael deep, deep inside of them. When you read the Quran, Ishmael is the chosen one. And Ishmael should have been sacrificed by Abraham on Mount Moriah. But deep inside, they know that they have been rejected by Abraham. They don't know this fatherly love yet. And they are so much identified with Ishmael and with the pain of Ishmael, with one of probably the worst things that can happen to a son, to be rejected by its own father. And that is how they never really feel that God or can be like a father that loves them. And that is something we cannot heal without Jesus. They will always be jealous on the Jews. They will, every time the Jews are more successful, they will be jealous like Ishmael is jealous on Isaac. Yeah, and it goes over Esau and Jacob and the same things. So this jealousy or being rejected or not having the calling or the promise is deep inside of them. So if you look at all the modern things and borders and security, it's all nice. I don't think there's a solution. It's much deeper, where the West thinks it's a territorial conflict, but it's a religious conflict. And it just will have a solution when really they get to know a loving Father, and then reconciliation will be possible like it was with Isaac and Ishmael.
If I had 3 hours, I would delve into that more. That is incredibly deep and probably the best explanation spiritually of that particular conflict I have ever heard. Thank you, Moshe. It was phenomenal. Phenomenal. I'm mindful we're nearly out of time, and so I wanted to just devote this last few minutes to you talking about the Holy Land and your vision for followers of Christ and also people who haven't yet met Christ, what your vision is for them to encounter Jesus in that land. Why should we go to the Holy Land?
I think the Holy Land, and I'm now 35, and I do that already 12 years. So right away after the army, my mom said to me, you should become a tour guide. I said, when mom says, I should become a tour guide. But, I say when my mom would have been Jewish, I would be a lawyer today. But it was the best thing you can do, listen to the mom, and especially when the mom is a praying mom, then all works very well out in life. But anyway, we are... what did you... Sorry.
So your vision for people to encounter Jesus.
Yeah. So when organizing these tours, we need to organize the hotels, the buses, and all the logistics. But it wouldn't be at all something interesting with not having the feedbacks and the experiences that people go through coming to the land. the Holy Land has always been seen as something old or old-fashioned, or I don't need to really go and touch stones. And it's not about stones, and that's what I want to say. I'm 35, and we are the youngest doing this from the competitors we have in Israel. And I was, fed up in the tour guide course that they told us, to the evangelicals, take them to Caesarea Philippi, and the Catholics take them to Nazareth. And that's it. So that's how you differentiate. And I didn't like this. Is this, it's not the Catholic gonna put, it's not the important thing that he lights the candle there and the other one prays there and thinks that this is the real place where Jesus sat on this stone exactly. And that's not the important part. So I think that God, throughout the Bible, always brings people back to specific geographical locations to make them something clear, or to remind them of something that he has done for them. If it's the Israelites going over the Jordan River, and God tells them, put stones there, that all the next generation will remember what I've done for you. In Sichem, where God made the covenant with Abraham, it's the same location that Joshua has reaffirmed the covenant. And it's exactly the same location where Jesus met the Samaritan woman. And in these meanings of these stories, it's all a connection, and it happened at the same place. And so God brings people back to specific location, and he always mentions this, where they are, with names, with explanation, what surrounds these locations, to make things clear to people. And I believe what I've seen throughout the last years is people have come to the land, hearing a story or hearing a biblical teaching at a specific location is much more, makes much more impact than having heard the same story anywhere else. But in addition, somehow God touches people's hearts and their lives have been changed. So people can forgive family members, people receive healing, people receive new, like reaffirmation of their calling. So that's what we really like to do, and to learn more about the Bible, to have a picture, have a geographical picture of it, helps us to really imagine how it was, how, and then as well knowing the Jewish society of today tells us or confirms us how important this message of Jesus is, even more because it, as I said, it hasn't changed really throughout the last 2,000 years. So, and that is something we feel like it's our mission to really use that land to connect people to God, to Jesus, to the Bible, and I think it's a really nice job. I love it, and when you love to do something, I think that's the same for a pastor. Then it's always the very important to know that you don't do too much in what you love, and that's why I took my family to Australia to spend time with them. But that is the thing that is really like what I feel like God has put on me and others that work with me together to, and as well as a family, to bring people to the land and have for them, their lives being changed.
Wonderful. Well, we're out of time there, but was that phenomenal? Yeah. Could you give Moshe a hand?